University of Technology. The rapporteur for this is Dr. Mrs. O.O. Allo. She will be supporting the section chair for this presentation. So Mrs. Adetunji will be presenting the profile of the presenter, and thereafter, Professor Naumann will have the floor. So over to you, Professor Adetunji.
All protocols duly observed. I welcome all to this conference, the third day. Here this morning we have Professor Dr. Felix Naumann. Professor Dr. Felix Naumann studied mathematics, economy, and computer sciences at the University of Technology in Berlin. After receiving his diploma in 1997, he completed his PhD thesis in the area of data quality at Humboldt University of Berlin in 2000. In 2001 and 2002, he worked at the IBM Ahmadine Research Center on data integration topics. From 2003 to 2006, he was assistant professor for information integration, again at the Humboldt University of Berlin. Since 2006, he holds the chair for information systems at the Hasso-Plattner Institute at the University of Potsdam in Germany. He has been visiting researcher at QCRI, AT&T Research, IBM Research, and SAP. His research interests include data profiling, data cleansing, and data integration with over 200 scientific publications. Next to numerous PC membership for international conferences, he has organized several conferences in various roles, including VLDB 2021 as PC co-chair. He is trustee of the VLDB endowments. I hereby present Professor Dr. Felix Naumann for his presentation for this conference. You are welcome, sir.
Thank you very much for this very kind introduction, and thank you very much in particular for the kind invitation to give a presentation here at your 10th conference. So do let me know if you can't hear me well. I can try to change something here. Otherwise, I'm looking forward to the presentation. Is the sound okay?
Yes.
Okay, I'll just continue, and you're very welcome to.
We can hear you. We can hear you. You can go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much. So also I'd like to emphasize, I'm very happy to take questions at any time. So do feel free to interrupt me if there's a question in the room or you have a question. I'm happy to, interrupt and discuss a little bit. I don't need to, run through the entire talk in one go. Some interaction is very welcome. Okay. So let me share my presentation. 1 second. So you should be able to see it now. And this is about the theme of the conference on bridging academia. And you said industry. I generalized this a little bit for this talk and called it the real world. So as you know, sometimes we say in academia, we're in this ivory tower, but sometimes we want to step down from this ivory tower and enter the real world with all the real problems and also the real impact that we can have. Before I get going, I do want to mention with one slide only the Hasso-Plattner Institute, because it's not very well known. It's a rather young institute. It was founded in 1999. On the bottom left, you can see Hasso-Plattner. He's a co-founder of SAP. And not only is he a co-founder, he's also a co-owner of SAP, of course. And I like to say he's the German Bill Gates, right? So he's a very rich billionaire. Nice thing is that he has founded this Hasso-Plattner Institute with substantial funding This is a computer science institute. Interestingly, even though it's privately funded, we also do teaching. So we have a bachelor degree, we have various master's programs, we educate PhD students, and of course, we do research and development, just like a normal, ordinary university institute. But as I said, it is privately funded. I do want to mention we are not a SAP institute. We are independent of SAP and can follow any kind of research direction that we like. We have about 20 chairs, about 1,000 students at any given point in time. So already quite a large institute. Within this institute, I'm head of the information systems team. It's called information systems, which is a little bit confusing. In essence, I'm a database person. You already heard from the introduction of my CV that I have a lot to do with data. And here you can see my team, and all the nice research projects that I've been doing are, of course, thanks to my great PhD students and postdoc researchers, right? And I just want to highlight a few of these things because they will become later interesting when I tell you about my research experience with industry and the difficulties of transferring research results to practice or to industry or to the real world. So as you can see, there's a lot of focus on data. We do data cleansing, we do data integration, data profiling, of course, since I'm a database chair. But of course, nowadays, but also 20 years ago already, data was clearly a key asset of organizations, but also a key requirement to collaborate in research, a key requirement to do good research that is relevant and interesting to industry. So if you think of this, the notion of data cleaning, where you have a table of persons or of products, and you want to clean this table, you want to develop methods that automatically clean that table, of course, you will need real-world data. You cannot just make up your own table and then clean it, because then there's the clear suspicion that the methods with which you entered the errors clearly are easy to find, so cleaning suddenly becomes easy because we made the data dirty ourselves. But if we get data from the real world, then we have real problems and very surprising problems that we never thought about, and then can evaluate our methods against those surprising problems, and then develop add-on methods that also solve those new kinds of problems, right? So this is why collaborating with industry is very important for us, but it is also very difficult, as we will see in the next few slides. We also do all sorts of other things. One aspect is data quality or information quality. Can we measure data quality? And much of our research, and I'm sure this is true also for many in the audience, has recently been driven by the AI hype. So a lot of the things that we do either use AI methods or machine learning methods, or much more actually, we perform data management to support AI applications. And there, it is even more important to provide good data, to be able to clean data, but also to get real-world data, to leave the ivory tower and actually work on real-world problems. To give you a little bit of a background on my research experience with industry, and I'd like to say that what I will be telling you in this talk is purely based on my experience, my lessons learned. I don't do specific research, sociological research on transferring research to industry, but I'm, a traditional, let's say, database researcher. But as you can see, I've worked with lots of kinds of organizations, right? So as you can see, large companies like IBM, SAP, SAP, Rolls-Royce, they have a factory here in the area, but also with nonprofit organizations like Wikimedia, or an art institute. So they, of course, have completely different kinds of data. They have different kinds of motivations, and they have different kinds of needs, right? And then some corporations have also been in the finance industry, again, very, very data-driven. And finally, of course, we also work with many, many startups. Usually startups don't have the necessary input to do good technology transfer, but there we can think about people transfer, which is also bridging academia and industry by sharing persons and sharing knowledge, and not only sharing technology. We do all kinds of projects with industry. One thing that we do at Hasso-Plattner Institute here in Germany are so-called bachelor projects. So here we work with 6 to 8 students over 1 year, always with an external partner. So these are young students. They are, towards the end of their bachelor studies, but still, not so experienced. So they learn a lot in these projects. But our goal always is that the results of these projects are actually transferred to industry, transferred to our partner, and ideally actually put to use there. Another type of project that can have industry impact are, of course, master's theses. These are 6-month theses by master's students. Sometimes we do them with industry, although I have to point out, and I should point out, working with these students on industry projects is always a little bit challenging because of this time frame of half a year. Half a year often is enough for a student and the advisor to understand the problem, to work on a solution, but not necessarily to actually transfer that solution to the industry partner, which would take at least another half year, maybe even more. But of course, our partners there are always very welcome to hire our master's students and then do the technology transfer in retrospect after hiring the student, right? And then finally, longer term projects like PhD theses, which run for 3, 4, sometimes 5 years. Of course, these can dive much deeper into research problems from industry, provide solutions, and then work with industry to actually make it happen, make impact in the real world. And so I'll skip to the motivation part here and say, so why are we even interested as a group, as a researcher, but also as academia in a whole? Why are we interested in what motivates us to work with industry to transfer this? And first of all, of course, academic impact is a big motivation, right? So we can't stay within the ivory tower, but what industry and organizations promise is real world impact. So as a researcher, usually, at least I hope, and personally I am driven by making the world a better place. This is a very general statement, of course, but this is of course how we motivate ourselves to also work with industry, because only industry can really have actual impact on daily lives. And then finally, the last point of satisfaction, of course, of motivation is, of course, just simply personal satisfaction. So the proud faces of students actually making something work in practice, affecting hundreds, maybe thousands, or even millions of people, is great to see. And of course, in the end, you've done a good job. Not so much you've earned a lot of money, especially not when you're a student, but that you are very skilled and can be satisfied with the results. And as I mentioned also, there are different kinds of technology transfer, knowledge transfer. This would be simply understanding the problem, understanding solutions, and talking to industry partners. Technology transfer for me is then actually transferring, let's say, code artifacts, programs, actual research results. And then finally, as I mentioned earlier, of course, also people transfer, which to me is probably the most impactful kind of technology transfer or transfer of research or from academia, because we produce so many people, students, and of course they have in them lots of technology, lots of knowledge that can have a lot of impact. Okay, so much for kind of my background and the things that we do. So I'd like to align this talk with the, let's say, quite traditional research process, and then I'll translate that process to engineering type of research, and then see what are the impediments, what are the challenges for technology transfer. So traditional research, you have a hypothesis, you design experiments, you design empirical studies, you design a system, and then you test it, and hopefully it works very well, it improves state of the art, and then ideally you publish a result in a paper, in a book, and you're happy, and that's what research does, right? In engineering, we try to go a little bit further. So sometimes we're not so much driven by a hypothesis, but we're driven by an actual problem, ideally a problem from an organization, a real world problem. And then as engineers, computer science engineers, we actually build systems, right? So we don't design our research experiments. We don't so much do empirical research, but we build things. So this is the implementation part. And then we don't usually test the hypothesis, but we evaluate our artifacts. So we try to find out, does it scale? Does it distribute? And in particular, does it solve the real world problem? And then finally, when we're satisfied, we might also publish our results. Of course, we always want to, but we also want to transfer these results to industry, to partners, to other organizations. Okay, so this is the presentation overview. First, I will address the issues of finding a research problem with technology transfer in mind. Then I'll talk about implementing a solution, again, keeping in mind that what we want to do actually has to work. It's not just as a prototype, it actually has to work. Then thereafter, we will look at the specific challenges. This will be the main part of the talk. As I said, this will be more from the perspective of a database researcher, but I'm sure maybe together we can try to generalize my observations and thoughts. And then the last part of the talk will be dedicated to how do we actually determine success? When do we know that we're done? And I will conclude with some lessons learned. Are there any questions or comments so far, or should I just continue? Okay. Okay, I'll just continue. Again, you're very welcome to interrupt with your thoughts and questions. Okay, so as the first step, I'd like to talk about identifying a transferable research problem. Oh, by the way, I will provide the slides afterwards, so maybe no need to write everything that you can see here. If you're interested, I will provide the slides later on through the organizers. Okay, so what is important in a research problem, in particular in a transferable research problem? So first of all, a research problem always has to have a novel problem or a novel solution to a known problem. So novelty from academic point of view is always important. We want to improve state of the art. We need to know state of the art. We need to improve on it. And even though it's a little bit of a shame, novelty is often defined by the research community and not so much by academia at large. I'm sure many of you have also made that experience, that you've identified a novel problem, you found a novel solution, only to find that in another area of computer science, the same kind of problem has also been addressed and solved in a similar way or in a different way. So realistically, novelty is part of the community. And of course, you want to find and identify a research problem where you have some expertise, so you have a chance of actually solving it. So that's the academic point of view. Now the industry point of view is the relevance. So is this problem relevant? Ideally, of course, any research problem, any research solution is relevant, but relevance to industry has a little bit of a different flavor. So while if you're doing performance measurements, let's say you're building a database system and you want it to run fast, and you have a great idea and your system will run 10% faster by whatever benchmark. 10% faster is a nice research result. 10%, you know, everything runs 10% faster. It's very nice. You can publish it. Everybody will be happy. Often enough, though, in my personal experience, industry is not interested in a 10% improvement. They'll say, look, Felix, if you want to work with us and you want to, want us to implement your ideas, it has to be 10 times as fast. So we need 1,000% improvement and not a 10% improvement. So this is, this is significant. It's very hard to improve state of the art to a degree that it's worthwhile for industry to actually take a look at it. Why is this the case? Because transferring technology is expensive for industry, and it's also risky. It might not work very well. And so there has to be a great reward down the road and not just a little bit of improvement. Also, of course, it has to be value added. So the organization needs to be able to identify why they should do it, because you're adding value to the product, to their processes, etc. Another aspect of research and research relevance is generalizability. So you're going to be solving a problem using specific environments, specific settings, but your solution has to work in a variety of environments. It has to be generalizable. It has to work with different kinds of data, etc. And then finally, of course, whatever you're doing in research, it has to be ethically compliant with the company. So it should not break any ethical rules, any values that the company has, and of course, no ethical values that the researcher has as well. And then finally, the last aspect of identifying a good problem, it has to be actually feasible, and your solution has to be feasible, which means an overly complicated, non-simple solution is something that will not be transferred. But research academia has the tendency to build very intricate, cool systems with lots of bells and whistles, maybe overdoing it at some point, and thus hampering or hindering technology transfer. Also, there might be in industry lots of hidden assumptions, right? So when we start a research project in our group, we gather some data that we want to work on, and we just start programming, developing ideas, talking about things, and then slowly but surely a system develops. But this might have assumptions that research that academia has, but that industry partners cannot fix. This starts from very simple things like, in which programming language are we working? What kind of hardware is available? How mobile should the system be, etc. These are hidden assumptions, at least hidden initially, that need to be uncovered to make it a feasible technology transfer. And then finally, of course, whatever you're doing has to be legal. So legal compliance has to be in place. In particular, privacy protection laws have to work, and there can be lots of other regulations about research on military type of research, for instance, which might not be legal in some situations. Okay, so let's say we've identified a good transferable research problem. We want to build a solution, but we want to build a useful solution, one that actually has a chance of being bridging academia and industry, right? So how do we do it? What are the impediments of building a useful solution? We have to have domain knowledge. And by domain knowledge, I don't mean domain knowledge in databases. I mean domain knowledge in the industry you're working with, finance knowledge, biotechnology, communication, whatever it is that you're doing, you have to understand that problem. You have to understand the data that underlies these problems. Without this, you're not building a useful solution. You often cannot take data from another domain, ideas from another domain, and then just hope it will work in industry, even though they're not working in communication, they're going to be working in finance. So understanding the problem, understanding the data. Understanding the data is a huge impediment. I'll talk a lot about that later on. A naive thought might be, well, they'll just send us, I don't know, a CSV file with the data that they want us to work on. That is for sure not enough. I've seen data sets, with 200 columns, 10 million rows, and everything is numeric, and you don't understand a thing about it. So how are you going to clean that data, for instance, if you don't know what it even means? The next problem that academia often, and this is true for my group as well, that academia often ignores is scalability. So we need to build solutions that don't just work in our lab environment on toy examples that are nice for a paper, an article. We have to build solutions that actually scale. And they have to scale based on hardware in terms of parallelization. They have to be able to distribute on multiple sites. There's hardly an organization that does not have a distributed setup, which brings all sorts of new problems. And it, in a sense, has to scale with use cases. So your solution has to be applicable to various kinds of use cases and not just the one that you have had in mind when doing research, right? So again, to take the data cleaning example, it's just my research area, it's not enough to clean product data. You will want to be able to apply the same methods to clean catalog data, to clean person data, to clean asset databases, et cetera, et cetera. So every data set is a little bit different. Your solution has to be generalizable. And as mentioned before, there might be different hidden assumptions. And if you don't take care of them right from the start, they will bite you in the end. Just very simple things like the data model. You know, what kind of database are they using? Is this a graph model? Is it XML data? Is it JSON data? Is it tabular data? What is their technical environment? What is the operating system, right? What are the libraries they use at the partner site, right? Which programming language, which spoken language do they use? Again, these are all later on impediments. If you don't have them in mind right from the start, you will run into problems for sure. Okay, so now I want to skip to the actual, let's say, meat of this presentation, the actual challenges on a day-to-day basis. And I will have two parts of this. One is the data sharing, and one is knowledge sharing. And the data sharing, I cannot emphasize enough how important this is for almost any kind of computer science research project, maybe apart from theory-oriented research. You need data, or you need to produce data. I always tell my partners, we can collaborate, but I will not start until I actually have your data on my machine, or I have access to your data. My experience has often been that we have a great idea, a great use case, but the partner is unable to share the data that our solution is supposed to work on. And then we cannot do research, in thin air. We need some kind of a grounding. So this data sharing and, if necessary, technology sharing or hardware sharing, depending on your research, is an absolute necessity. And then knowledge sharing, again, knowledge sharing has to go in both directions, and there are quite a few impediments to do this well. So for data sharing, I have three aspects that I quickly want to mention. So one aspect is syntactic challenges. So often enough, the volume of the data is so large that it's difficult to transfer. So you'd think in this day and age, this should not be a problem. It really is a problem. So data shipment, realistically, is a problem. Personally, I've traveled to partners and picked up a hard drive and then went back to our institute, and then we worked on the data there, simply because the volume is so large that it's hopeless to, let's say, download it or so, right? So try downloading 5 terabytes of data, it will just simply not work, right? Another difficulty is the data export. So simply the ability to get the data out of your system at the industry site and give it to the academic partner. This is often an impediment, simply because the volume is too large, and they worry about a performance hit. Exporting all the data from a database, for instance, does slow down that database, and often people don't want to do this. Another problem is variety of data, different data formats, different data models, as I mentioned, and often enough, if we are talking about personal data about persons, so personal data, anonymization is an important aspect. You need to anonymize the data. You cannot, at least under European and most US regulations, I'm sure in many other countries in the world, you cannot just share personal data. It has to be anonymized. And the problem in cooperation here is simply the ability to anonymize. So a person on the site of the industry partner has to anonymize data. They are not experts in doing this, and that is a big impediment. And then the variability. So if you work with partners over time, there will be many changes to what they are doing. Format changes of the data, their systems change, the stuff you're getting suddenly looks different, and you'll have to adapt to that. All the way down to very simple stuff like just transfer errors, right? Every day you get data, some days suddenly you don't get any data. What happened? And now suddenly there's a lot of work in catching up getting the missing data. A lot of work on the partner side, lots of question marks on the academic side. And this is a big problem. We had one research project that I can mention where we were working with the company that organizes bottle deposits in Germany, right? So when you buy, I don't know, a beer or a Coke or so, you can return the bottle and fetch a deposit. And usually you return it to a machine, and they were downloading the logs from the machines and sending them to us every day. And every week there was some kind of problem. So in essence, we had hired half a person to do nothing but fix these transfer errors all the time. So these are very mundane problems, but they can be very frustrating for both sides. Then, once we are done with the syntactic challenges, we have semantic challenges. This was about understanding the problem, right? So what is the schema of the data? Is the thing that you're talking about documented, right? How up to date is the data? How accurate is the data? What is the data quality that you're working with? Of course, for us data cleaning researchers, this is great for us if you have poor quality, because that's the whole point where we're doing a project. But if you're doing other kinds of projects, like data analytics, machine learning type of projects, the data quality is an enormously important aspect. So an organization, a partner from industry, will give you their data, and you will, let's say, train a system on that data. But then you will find out that data was not accurate. It was outdated. It was incomplete. It had missing values. It has skew in the distributions. Lots and lots of data quality problems that will hinder your collaboration. Okay, I'll continue. So semantic challenges we've understood, and now the most important challenge in my experience are social challenges. So social challenges, what do I mean by that? I mean the willingness of the organization and the individual persons in the organization to actually collaborate and work together and share data, share knowledge, work together. So there's this concept of so-called data fiefdoms. So these are, let's say, department managers who are sitting on their data and do not want to share it for various reasons. It's their fiefdom, it's their domain, and they won't give it out. For sometimes good reasons, sometimes for annoying reasons. So the first reason, of course, is added effort, right? So management says, we want to do this great project, and now the actual IT person says, oh, it's great that you want to do it, but I don't have the manpower, I don't have the time to actually provide all the data that you're looking for. Right? More importantly, maybe, is the loss of control. So once the data leaves that department, it's out of control of that person. The person does not know what you're going to do with the data, who you're going to share the data with, what you're going to find in the data. It's just a loss of control and a loss of power. As we all know, information is power. So if you own some data, it's not easy at all to give it out. And I can tell you, in my experience, department managers, IT managers, literally ignore orders by the CIO or the CTO of a company. They just won't do it. They'll get a direct email saying, please do this, work with HPI to do this, and they will just not do it. And so as a researcher, you're sitting around kind of waiting, wondering what's going on, and then actually quite often the projects die at that stage. Another reason, even if they're willing to share, is some embarrassment. Right? So this might be data sets that people have been working with and creating over the last 10 years, and it might be of poor quality. It might have a very outdated model. So people are sometimes simply embarrassed to share their data, worrying what somebody else might find in the data. Sometimes it's a valid concern. Sometimes you do have very poor data, but sometimes it's really just the uncertainty. How do you solve those kind of problems? You build trust, right? This is very, very important, and I'll talk about some of these solutions later on. And then a final social challenge is simply communication. right? This is, drives any organization, any collaboration, and communication is often the problem. Simply finding the right language, just finding the right mode of communication, email versus, I don't know, Slack versus visits versus telephone. All these are important aspects. And as a researcher, we have to be able to adapt to the different forms of communication and the preferred form of communications in organizations. And then the final challenge, which you could say it's even more important, is our legal challenges. I would still maintain the social challenges are the most challenging and the most important one to solve. Legal challenges you can always solve in some way by, let's say, sharing less data, right? And so what kind of legal challenges are there? There's the security aspect. So companies don't want to share their data simply because they were afraid that it will end up on the internet or be shared to their competition, right? And to some point, they don't even want their schema to be shared. So the structure of their data is not allowed to be shared because, again, the competition might read something out of just the structure, never mind the data, right? And then there's actually the legal aspect of how do I access the data. So even if, let's say, we sign a non-disclosure agreement, an NDA, and the company is perfectly willing to share the data with it, often they are not allowed for legal purposes to allow remote access to the data. So we actually have to physically visit them to fetch the data. Another aspect, of course, is privacy, in particular when we're talking about personal data, data about customers, data about employees, etc. As I said earlier, we have very strict laws. So in those cases, you need to anonymize to be able to share that data. And anonymization is a very, very difficult problem. There's a whole research area only about how to properly anonymize data to ensure privacy of the persons involved. Right? And then last but maybe not least are the ethical aspects. So these are not really legal aspects, but these are aspects you also need to look at, what are the values of the organization? What are the values of the researcher? Do they align, right? Are we going to be doing research that we can also live with? When we're doing pure research without a collaboration partner, we always, in a sense, we're quite free to, do lots of kinds of research, as long as for us we understand that there are good use cases for our results. Of course, there's always the dual use problem. Research results can be, misused for unethical or illegal purposes. But at least when we're doing pure research, we can always point to this and say, yes, there's always dual use, but there's also good value in our results. But as soon as you work with an organization, you will have to understand the ways that your results will be used, the concrete ways. So then you're no longer in a dual use scenario, you're in an actual application scenario that you have to be able to live with. And I can tell you again from my experience, I mentioned earlier that we have worked with Rolls-Royce, right? And Rolls-Royce, most of us know Rolls-Royce as a car manufacturer, but actually they make a lot of things, but in particular, they also make jet engines, right? I'm sure most of you are aware of this, but they make not only jet engines for Boeing and Airbus, they make jet engines for military airplanes, right? And so I personally, I thought this is okay. This is a ethically perfectly fine company. But actually, some of my students thought otherwise. It said, no, they will not work with Rolls-Royce because one branch of Rolls-Royce does military development and builds military products. So, so it's not just your own values, it's the values of your team, the values of the other organization. And suddenly, you are much more involved in these aspects because there's a real application scenario and not just a vague research result. Okay, so this was about data sharing, right? Getting the data from the company, very, very important aspect. As I said earlier, I don't start projects until I actually have access to the data. Before that, I'll say I'm not going to type a single line of code until I have access to the data, because more often than not, this is where the projects fail. Even towards the end of the project, there's still no access to data, so we can't try our results, and we are frustrated. The other thing that we want to share, of course, is knowledge and code, right? And this now typically goes the other direction. So once we have the data, we take a year of doing great research, have some results. How do we bring it back to the organization? And again, there's some impediments that I wanted to mention. So solution complexity, I've mentioned that earlier. So good documentation is of the essence. Knowledge transfer has to be done by talking a lot, giving presentations, giving demos, doing code walkthroughs, etc., etc. And then, of course, if the solution is too complex, the organization also has to keep in mind they have to maintain that code. So simplicity is often key, and even simplicity by sacrificing some nice functionality. Yes. So rather a simple, good solution than a complex, great solution. At least this has been my experience. And sometimes it's a little bit frustrating for researchers, PhD students, master students, myself, because we have great ideas. They're just a little bit complicated. But then our partners will say, it's a great idea, we love it, but we cannot maintain it. And so it has to die. Another aspect of knowledge sharing is intellectual property. So this is an awful legal aspect, and I hate dealing with this, but it is, again, very important. As researchers, obviously, we want to publish our results in the public domain, presented at conferences, etc., while industry partners are not interested at all in the publication. Actually, they don't want things to be published, right? So when we are bridging this gap from academia to industry to the real world, we have to have in place contracts that clearly state what will happen with the research results. And at least in my group, I don't do any research together with organizations where we are not allowed to publish our findings. Of course, we won't publish trade secrets of our partners, but we want to publish the general method. And usually, organizations are okay with this. They are also proud of doing, let's say, joint publications. It's a good, looks great. They're collaborating with a research institute. And often enough, they have a good advantage by having worked on the solution already for a year or two with you. So they have that advantage and don't mind publication because they already have a product made out of it. Instead of publication, you can also do patents. You can publish your work as a patent. Here, I just wanted to mention this. This is, of course, a way to publish your results and protect it at the same time. I'm not a big fan of patents. It costs a lot of money and is just not a fun activity because you have to rewrite everything. So this is one aspect of dealing with the intellectual property problem, but one that I really don't prefer. And then finally, I put student work as an aspect on there. We often work with bachelor and master students. And at least in Germany, by law, the work of the students, of course, is owned by the students. Even if we advise them in developing a great system or a great algorithm, it's their work. So we can't just say, okay, great, thank you, dear student, for developing this nice idea. I will now give it to our partners, or I will sell it to our partners. This is not allowed. Students have a clear say in what happens with their work. And this also has to be settled in advance before you do these kinds of collaboration. Then usually everybody agrees and everything is nice and peaceful, but still my advice is always have the very short 1 or 2 page contracts in place, clearly outlining what will happen with the results. And then knowledge sharing also has to, as I mentioned earlier, take care of the production environment, which programming languages, which libraries, what is the expectation on code quality. So often it's not enough to just throw your code over the wall and say, here it is, have fun. Usually the demands are much, much higher in terms of documentation, but also programming style, etc. This is a general computer science issue. Okay, I'll skip to the last part. So we're almost done. We'll have hopefully plenty of time for Q&A. So now I've talked a little bit about the challenges. Now maybe the more, let's say, positive part. How do we determine success? And in particular, success, let's say, from an academic point of view, but more particular from an industry collaboration point of view, right? So scientific success, is maybe simply a proof, right? You can prove that your system is good and works or has certain properties, and then you're done. That's your success measure. You can just say it's correct, right? Other scientific success measures are simply scalability. You just measure your system, and if you're faster than the competition, that's success. Not enough for industry, but for science, yes. A generalizability. You've developed a new, let's say, ML model or an AI system. How generalizable is it? How well does it work in other situations? And then that's a success, right? And then finally, of course, scientific success, publications and citations. It's difficult to really measure and compare scientific output, but from a personal point of view, having your work published, accepted by the community, and cited by the community is great and very satisfying success. Yes. Then the next part, though, is that going forward to industry, their feasibility is our success measure. Can we actually transfer our ideas, and do they work correctly at the other site? This is a clear, prerequisite for, technology transfer. It actually has to run. This can be very satisfying, getting it to run at your partner's site. Lots of technical difficulties, but that's success. It not just runs on my prototypical little system or on my laptop, it actually runs in an industry environment. It's a great success measure. And of course, finally, usefulness. Not only does it run, but the partners are actually using it in practice, and it's productive use, and it adds value. If you can achieve that in research, you can be very, very proud, right? And this is actually something that you can, that it also feeds back into academic measures. Because if you're able to say, look, I have this great idea, I built a system, it's nicer, better, faster than state of the art, and it is in practical use at this partner organization, that is a very, very strong argument that this work should be published. It's a strong argument that others should try these ideas themselves and make use of them. Then you can really say, I made, the world a better place, maybe just a tiny bit, but you've actually done it, right? So this is, from an academic point of view, the kinds of success that are achievable when working with partners, apart from, of course, maybe getting some funding, some money from the partners, but that's usually not how I want to evaluate it. I want to evaluate it based on, is it actually in use? Okay, so my last slide, lessons learned. I've mentioned a few along the way. Communication is key, trust is key, and dedication is key. All of these are difficult, right? Communication builds trust. Once you have trust, you need a very, very strong dedication on both sides to actually go through with the project. And why do I mention this dedication in particular? Because that's where most of the work lies. Writing a research paper, I'm not going to say it's easy, but it's easier than actually getting your stuff to work at the site of your industry partner. So the students, the advisors, the partners really have to be dedicated to pull this through, even if there's no immediate additional output. You're not generating new cool ideas and algorithms. You really have to work hard to get it to run. In the end, you get satisfaction, right? You can be very satisfied. You can be proud of your work. You have real world impact. You have academic impact. This should be the motivation. But the motivation of real world impact is what we're talking about today. And what I would always argue is especially difficult, but especially rewarding. These kind of risky things are actually what we do in research anyway. So I can only hope that many of us continue doing good collaborations with industry and good technology transfer from academia to the real world. And with this, I would like to close. Thank you for your attention. I hope there was some insights, or at least maybe not novel insights, but at least many of you might have been nodding and saying, yes, this is my experience as well. Then I would already be satisfied. Thank you. If you're saying something, I cannot hear you at the moment. You might be muted or so. I cannot hear you. Yes, now it works.
Are you hearing me now?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yes. Yes. Academia, that is, you have given us the theory and practice on bridging academia and the real world. You have been able to give to us today how to really transfer our research to practice. Research being carried out in the university, the academia environment, how to transfer this even to the real world. And you started by saying that we need support, mostly from the management, to do this work. There must be a good support from the management to have a good success.
Yes.
And to enhance the research, now we have types of research which you have given unto us to transfer. We can actually transfer the knowledge that we have in the academy. We can also transfer, which is cumulates to be the technology in the academia, to transfer to the real world. Now to the academics, the lecturers and the students, as you have said, there must be interest, especially to the students that are doing the work.
Yes.
The interest in research on the side of the students, and so that they will be very skilled in their work. If they are not interested in the research, they will not be skilled, as you have said.
Yes.
Now, for academia, there must be transfer of knowledge to the real world in order to tell the real world something is happening at their end. And to do this, now you have been able to give us that in our research, there must be hypothesis, there must be design, tests, and publication. Now we design, now to the real world in the industry, as you have said, there must be that collaboration between the academia and the real world. The real world is where the industries are. The
Yes.
industry must be very close to the academia. They have the problem. They have to define their problem to us, and the academia will have to look at how to find solution to this problem. And that is the research that we carry out. We have to look at the problem, we design it and implement it. And in that, during the course of our research, you have done so much on data. Data is very, very important in research. You have discussed about data sharing. You have discussed about data, the problem. Now, from what you have told us this morning, your experience, because you told us an experience you have, there is that kind of phobia in the industry in giving out their data, fear. That is social challenges about their data, which you have dealt so much with. You had experience over there, and it's almost everywhere. So in sharing data, there are social challenges. They are not always ready to release their data, the total data, in order for the academia to have this to work. Because without their data, we cannot really give them the real solution to the problem they're having. That's a big problem. And the research must be in a way that the data has good format. The data that is not with good format cannot be really worked with in the academia, because the format would, as you have said, we give a false report. There will be wrong solution if
Yes.
the data is given in a wrong format, as you have said. I hope I'm speaking your mind.
Yes.
Now, funding the research is very expensive. That is, our publication, our patenting, everything has to be funded. That's another challenge to the side of the academia. So now, as you have said, even though if the problem is going to be relevant, it has to be funded. It must be funded. And so funding is another challenge to the academia. And from your presentation, your experience with the industry where you work with, they have to do the funding partly by the academia and the management. So we also discussed about, I think I have a question in that area.
Okay.
Later. At the implementation side, understanding the real knowledge we are sharing is very important. Now, again, you told us about that legal practice by the academia. Is it the academia that will have the legal practice, or the industry that will get the legal practice for the academia? I'm here to understand that about this legal practice. It's not other clear. Maybe it's by the side of the academia or the industry. Now, you went further to tell us about.
I don't hear you anymore. Your sound just dropped. You've muted. You're muted. I don't hear you anymore. I cannot hear you at the moment. It looks like you're muted. I cannot hear you. I cannot hear you. I cannot hear you.
Amazon.
I cannot understand you. I'm sorry.
With our data and implement to the industry and patenting the work. So that will lead to after.
You're gone again. I don't know what's going on. I cannot hear you, unfortunately. I briefly heard you just a second ago, but then it's now dead again. It's some kind of setting on your side. No, I can't hear you. I can't hear you. No. I'm sorry.
So as you have said, for security challenges, you said there must be a legal practice.
Yes.
So that the academia will not be taken as stealing their data. There must be a legal practice that you have said. And the sharing of knowledge. And the sharing of knowledge on the side of the academia, we have to document the code implementation. That is sharing our knowledge. And there must be a good maintenance of these codes.
Mm-hmm.
When
yeah, if I may, can I add something to that? May I add something? So I think documentation is important. But I think the best way to share knowledge is to transfer people from academia to industry. That's much better than, I mean, documentation is important, but actually sending out students from academia to industry, that's how real knowledge moves to industry.
So in sharing, students in the school, in the academia environment, have to be sent to the industry,
yes,
in order to do the work, to implement it and carry out the work with them.
I
that
think
is
so.
Good.
Mm-hmm.
So for the total scientific success at the end of the day, to have a good scientific success, there must be a proof that we are doing something at the academias. And that's the success. If they will be able to showcase that we are doing something, that's a proof. If the real world is really gaining from us, it's a proof that we have academic success. So the research outputs must be useful to the real world and add value to whatever they are doing. In all, there must be good communication, as you have said. So in essence, Professor Naumann has given us theory and practice on bridging the gap between the academia and the real world. Thank you. A round of applause for Professor Naumann again.
So thank you very much for this excellent summary. I think clearly I got across my message, and I hope you have a great
All
conference.
right.
Are there any questions? Yes.
Yeah, we are going to take questions now. If we have questions for Professor Newman, can you one? Any other question? Two? Okay, any other? Okay, two questions.
Sure.
Thank you, Professor Newman, for this wonderful presentation. Okay, I have two questions. My first question goes thus. What role can government agency play in facilitating the collaboration between academia, industry, and the real world? Secondly, can you please share any success story or example of individual who successfully transitioned from academia to industry or vice versa? What lesson can be learned from their experience and in bridging the gap? Thank you.
Good. So if I understood you correctly, the first question is about what governments can gain from this kind of collaboration, what the government can gain. So I'll answer that. So I mean, so much of research, at least in Germany and in Europe, is government funded anyway, right? So a lot of government funding is in research. And I guess, I mean, I'm not an economist, but I guess the overall hope is that that this technology transfer will make the country economically successful. You can, I mean, my favorite example is the success of IT companies in the United States, which is obvious, of Amazon and Apple and IBM and Microsoft, etc., which now make up a huge part of the industry of the United States, while, let's say, car manufacturing and natural resources don't play such a huge role. So this is a clear and short transfer from academia, from research ideas, IT ideas, to the largest companies in the world within 20 years or less, right? So at least in Germany and Europe, we're trying to copy that in a sense. We're trying to say, okay, you know, what do we have to do? How can we foster research that such success stories happen that literally influence the economy of the entire country? Of course, there's a second aspect to it, which is maybe not so much the novel research aspect, but educating students in IT and educating them how to come up with novel ideas, even if they don't do their own research, but teaching how to do research and then sending them to companies will be beneficial for these companies. So I always see research and education, as hand in hand. This is why I also mentioned that, sending out the students is this important aspect. And I think even companies that are not traditional IT, information technology companies, will significantly benefit and need IT support, IT ideas. They need to embrace machine learning ideas, etc., to be successful, right? So it's not so much doing novel research, but knowing how to do novel things, which is kind of a byproduct of our research. And I have to, oh yeah, and the second question was about, what can we learn by transitioning from research to industry? So as you noted, I myself have worked for industry once in a while. I spend my sabbaticals in industry, but there are also quite some examples of, let's say, famous professors who have transitioned from research to industry and back. So this is always a possibility. What can we learn? Well, I can tell you one direction, right? So having worked in industry, you sometimes come back to academia a bit disappointed because the real world is often not as cool as research is, right? And this is a little bit what I've tried to come across. So the real world is more difficult. It's more tedious. You have to do all sorts of extra tasks that are not needed for research, right? But you also come back to academia and understand better which aspects are important, which aspects are not important. And in particular, which aspects are important for industry. Everything is important for research and academia in some sense, right? But some things are maybe not as important. So there's whole research branches on, let's say, specific chip design, FPGA chip design, right? This is not as much adopted in industry. So it's great research, but it's not at the moment realistic to have this scaled out in huge amounts. So it's great work, but is not as relevant in industry. I know some colleagues will crucify me for this, but I think this is a true statement, right? So you understand better coming from research what really is important, and you learn the language, right? I mentioned earlier communication is important. By transitioning, you understand the thinking of your partners. You understand what they have in mind. You understand the sometimes complicated processes in an organization. So you can't expect an answer in a week. You can expect an answer in a month. And it's not because people are lazy, it's because organizations work differently. So the communication aspect probably is the best thing to learn by trying out the two different areas.
Thank you very much, Professor Naumann. The second question.
Professor Naumann, thank you for that answer. I'll still take my question out partly from that, your answer. And I want you to share with us your experience. Now, if there's going to be any bridging between the academia and the real world, there must be real world learning, where the students are really learning the real things.
That's
That
very
must
good.
must be put in place. Now, my question is this. For the industry, they have the problem. We have the solution. Now, I want you to share with us your own experience. Is it the academia that will go to the industry looking for solution, or the industry will come to the academia? This is my problem that I need to solve. The gap between the academia and the industry is so wide, especially in the third world. The first problem we have in the third world here is the real world learning environment. We lack that. And another one is this phobia of the industry coming to the academia. I want you to share with us your own experience, how you were able to succeed in giving them what they need, solving their problem.
Yes, it's a very good question, two very good questions. So first of all, how can students learn a real world experience, right? How do we, in academia and students, how do they even get in touch and understand what the needs are in industry? And there, as I mentioned earlier, at least in our university, we have these what we call bachelor projects. So we put together teams of 6 to 8 students that work together with an industry partner. There's no cost involved, so there's no funding. The students aren't funded, so the industry partner does not have to pay anything. They have to, be advisors to the students, and the students are solving a real-world problem that then the industry can use for free, in essence, right? There's, of course, has to be the understanding that the student solution is not going to be a product. It's not going to be perfect. It might not be stable, but it should be a working, functioning thing. And why can we achieve this? Because we work in larger teams. So traditionally, a bachelor thesis or a master thesis is one student working on one project together with the professor or the advisor, right? And no matter how great you are, you're not going to build a solution that is interesting for industry with one person for 3 months. It's just impossible. But if you have 6 students or 8 students together as a team, and they have 1 year time, you can really build something that the industry is interested in. It's an investment, but it's great for both sides. It's great for the students because they're going to be working day to day with industry. It's great for academia because they get to know good students that they can hire then later on, right? Who are already experts in their area, right? So this is a win-win situation that has worked very well. So in some sense, learning by doing from the student perspective. So the other question that you had is a very good question. Who has to move? Do I go to industry and say, look, I have this great idea, can you use it? Or does industry come to me and say, we have this problem, can you solve it? And the answer is very simple. There's of course both, right? So sometimes research and academia comes up with problems just simply because they are good problems, not because they're relevant, but they're kind of cool. They're well defined, they are tricky, they are challenging, and so we say, okay, let's see if we can solve this problem. It's an intellectual exercise, right? And then in the end, if it's a great solution, we do try to think of application scenarios. We sometimes build a demo. We build an actual little demonstration system, and then show that at conferences, make a video of it, this kind of thing. So in those cases, we actually go to industry. And I can tell you, industry partners don't read research papers. This is my experience. They will not read your research paper. Different language, too complicated, too long, et cetera, et cetera. But they will look at a demo. They will look at a video, because then they understand this is something working. It's not just an idea. It actually works. Right? So you do have those occasions. But indeed, more often, industry comes to us and says, look, here's an interesting problem. It has to do with data, let's say. And so they find us. How do they find us? They find us because we put extra effort in not only publishing research papers, we also try to write white papers or short articles about the kind of research we're doing, so that industry folks don't have to read a research paper. They will, read a magazine, an industry magazine, not a scientific magazine, an industry magazine. So we have to make that extra effort to say, okay, let's write, a more common article about our ideas, try to publish them in a more common industry place, and then people will read that and then get back to us. It's work. It's always work. You have to do something extra to build that bridge. Just like the companies also have to do something extra, because they have to dedicate people to work with you, right? But often, in some sense, we have to do the first step, because we have to either explain what we're doing or solve problems that industry has.
Last question.
Thank you for that beautiful presentation, Professor Naumann. My question is about the motivation. The academia have the student with them that are working with them in terms of the research. Now, how can the industry assist in terms of the motivation?
Yes, it's a very good question. Absolutely. So, of course, it kind of depends on the industry, right? If the industry is, I don't know, let's say Google, right? The motivation is clear, because what they can say is, whatever you do, millions of people are going to use it. That's a great motivation. That motivates a lot of our students to then join these larger companies, because whatever they do, they know it's going to help millions, right? That's one part of the motivation, right? Another motivation that industry, it's kind of a stupid motivation, but of course some funding is also motivation, right? So, if you're hungry or you don't have a job, then of course, if industry is going to pay you, that's a great motivation to work with them. As I said, it's kind of stupid, but that's what industry can give us. They have the problems, and hopefully they have some money, right? But I think what is most motivating to me anyway, and also to my students, is an interesting, challenging problem. That is the motivation. So if an industry partner comes to us and says, look, we have this new product, but this is not working well. Do you have any ideas? And then we have and then it's a challenging problem with no obvious solution, where you really have to think about the solution. That usually is sufficient motivation. It's the motivation of the mind, basically, right? We as researchers, we want to tackle difficult problems. And I think that's what the best thing that industry can do. No matter the money, no matter the users, good, interesting problems is what at least I like.
Thank you very much, Professor Newman. That was a very beautiful, thought-provoking, and insightful presentation on the theory, practice, on bridging academia and the real world. I want us to give a round of applause for Professor Newman.
Thank you very much. It was a great pleasure. Thank you for the great questions. Thank you for the great questions.
It's nice hearing from you. Professor Newman is presenting this morning from the Hasso-Plattner Institute at the University of Potsdam in Germany. I met Professor Newman in March or April this year in Germany, and he was very willing to work with us. In fact, he wanted to visit Nigeria, but he raised some security concern. He will have been here physically. Yeah, but I can assure you that it's peaceful in Nigeria.
Yes.
In the future, when you want to come, we will arrange that you'll be able to come physically. But we have really enjoyed your presentation.
Thank you.
I want you to extend my regards to Professor Miner.
I will do that.
The other professors and the director of the HPI. It was nice having your presentation this morning. So we look forward to your slides. Yeah, you send the slides to my email so that we can share to the audience.
Yes.
And then we are still trusting that you still be collaborating with our faculty, and we'll be having more of this kind of lectures.
Absolutely.
Once again, thank you very much, Professor Newman. Do have a very wonderful day.
Thank you for having me. It was a great pleasure.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
We can come up with ideas of what we have been investigating and researching on through our students, postgrad students. Like he said, I attended a workshop in HPI in April this year. Now they have a fund. They put some students together, 5, 6 students. They execute a project, and then industry comes to get the solution, and they go and produce it. There's nothing. Of course, industry also have the R&D departments. They also do research, but essentially the university is the place for research. Yeah, that's our major business. What is the business of a lecturer? teaching, research, and community service. Yeah, so we are supposed to do